Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my very good friend, the distinguished gentleman from California, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, current ranking member of that committee, Mr. Nunes.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my friend, the top Republican on the Rules Committee. I'm struggling to understand what we're doing here today. We already know that the Democrats go to great lengths to defend the unconstitutional Affordable Care Act. They really believe that Congress can and should force the American people to buy something whether they want it or not. We know this because they made everyone vote on this same provision in Title I of the rules package last week. Now we're here voting on the same thing this week. Why, some Americans may ask? Because Democrats are trying to sell this farce as a vote to protect people with pre-existing conditions. But this is not a health care vote. This is a vote to give cover because the law they passed was unconstitutional and the individual mandate was deeply unpopular. They could put an end to this by passing a law that abides by the Constitution, but they're not willing to do that. Instead, we're wasting time here today voting on something for the second time. Republicans know that we can protect the people with pre-existing health conditions without infringing upon basic freedoms. This is why last week we voted on an amendment to the rules package to guarantee no American citizen can be denied health insurance coverage as a result of a pre-existing condition. We also voted to ensure that no American citizen can be charged a higher premium or cost sharing as a result of a pre-existing condition. But the majority would rather spend time and taxpayer money defending the constitutionality of the ACA's individual mandate. They seem to have forgotten that the Supreme Court told them back in 2012 that Congress does not have the power to make the American people purchase a product. The Democrats should not spend more taxpayer money defending the indefensible. Congress should focus its energy on making health care more affordable and giving people meaningful choice in health care again. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Barra.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of Title III of the House Rules package. A district court recently ruled that the entire Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional, and sadly, President Trump's Justice Department did nothing to defend the Affordable Care Act. They even urged the judge to strike down protections to those with pre-existing conditions. Now, I've heard and I understand my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't like the Affordable Care Act, but not to defend it, not to talk about the benefits is not defensible. I've heard many of my colleagues on the other side of the island talk about how they want to protect those with pre-existing conditions. Well, this is one way for us to protect those with pre-existing conditions. I see this as a doctor. I don't want to go back to the days when I would see patients who had cancer, had diabetes, had heart conditions, and through no action on their own lost their health insurance. I don't want to go back to the days where the health insurance companies could deny people those coverages, often necessary life-saving therapies and coverage. This is about doing the right thing for America's patients. That's why we're here. Now, what Title III of the rules package does is it says that the House of Representatives should intervene in Texas versus the United States. If this lawsuit succeeds, it's going to repeal the Affordable Care Act with no solution, none. Millions of Americans are going to lose their health insurance coverage. The American public spoke loud and clear. They want this body to sit down, to come together, to provide coverage for America, affordable coverage. That's what we need to do as Democrats and Republicans. I urge my colleagues to vote for Title III and to make it clear this Congress will protect those with pre-existing conditions. And I've got friends on the other side of the aisle. I heard many of them talk about how they wanted to protect those with pre-existing conditions. A vote against Title III of the rules package is a vote against protecting those Americans. And I'll yield back.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume simply to make a quick point. Actually, a vote against this provision is not a vote against pre-existing conditions. It's a vote to limit the power of the Speaker, not to allow the Speaker to, on her own, decide whether she's going to intervene in law cases where, frankly, the intervention of this House isn't necessary. There are states litigating against the ACA. There are states litigating for the ACA. The idea that either side is unrepresented, I think, just doesn't bear serious scrutiny. So, not only is it an exercise in futility, in my opinion, it's an exercise that's totally unnecessary because we've already given the Speaker that power. The majority's already seen to fit that. So why we're wasting time, money, and effort in this particular exercise eludes me. But with that, Madam Speaker, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, Mr. Neal.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to Secretary Shalala as well. Madam Speaker, I feel like I have a pre-existing condition. It's arguing about the Affordable Care Act. For 10 years, we've argued about the Affordable Care Act. A campaign is part of forming a government. And no issue resonated with the American people in the last election like the issue of pre-existing condition. My friend, the gentleman from California, previously said he didn't understand why people had to buy something that they didn't want. Well, we require people to buy automobile insurance, and by the way, you don't buy automobile insurance the day after you've been in an automobile accident. And we probably don't want to buy homeowners insurance, but guess what? We don't buy it the day after your house is burned down. We buy it because the genius of insurance is the spreading of risk. So I ask the following rhetorical question, and that is, why should the rest of us annually put $1,000 into our premiums for health insurance to take care of those who don't want to buy health insurance? So what this discussion and argument is really about for the moment is the following. The child who is born with diabetes is then told under the old system that they can never buy health insurance, or if they do, it has to be rated. Back to the old actuarial argument about how do we spread risk. The protections that were built into the Affordable Care Act, which I helped to write, were based upon the idea of using the best principles of the marketplace while simultaneously using the ability of the federal government to prod certain behaviors, and those behaviors included a ban on pre-existing condition as an option for people who didn't want to buy health insurance. So what did the other side do? They filed a lawsuit. Now, they generally lecture us on activist judges. They decided that they would challenge what has become okay with the American people, the Affordable Care Act. They would challenge it in the federal courts and really didn't want to bring down the entire Affordable Care Act. Instead, they wanted to disassemble piece by piece parts of the Affordable Care Act that really, in a lot of ways, have made for its success. There is no arguing with the following statistic, that today, between 17 and 20 million Americans have health insurance that didn't have it before the Affordable Care Act. And back to those people who, by the way, their system of health care was the emergency room. So in the emergency room, we all know it's a pretty poor way to get health insurance because it really doesn't emphasize preventive care. So all of these options that we built into the Affordable Care Act, including making sure that people that had pre-existing condition couldn't be exploited in the marketplace with undue costs. This argument that we continue to have, Madam Speaker, here about the Affordable Care Act could be rectified in short order by both sides just working together to improve the Affordable Care Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to my good friend, the distinguished chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. I think that offer is made quite sincerely, and I think it would be taken up by our side. We can work together in a bipartisan way to do exactly what the gentleman suggests. In my opinion, this particular measure doesn't do that. It doesn't get us anywhere, involves us in litigation unnecessarily, and it does it, by the way, for the second time since we gave the Speaker this authority. I didn't vote for it. My friends did. That's their right. She has it. So why we're here on the floor today arguing about it, it mystifies me. But again, I know my friend's offer is made in good faith. I think it'll be taken up in good faith. We should work together to do exactly what my friend suggests, and that is guarantee that every American is protected from pre-existing conditions and able to go into the marketplace and buy insurance at a practical and reasonable rate that they can afford. So with that, Madam Speaker, I will reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, Mr. Pallone.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank, I'll call you the secretary, although you're one of my colleagues now. Congresswoman Shalala knows more about health care than I should say, probably is more of an expert on it than anybody else in this body. I just want to basically contradict what my Republican colleagues have been saying. They're saying that this is not about pre-existing conditions. That's exactly what this debate is about. We have seen the Republicans in the House, the President, consistently try to sabotage the Affordable Care Act. And what does that mean? That means sabotage and make it more difficult for people with pre-existing conditions to get coverage. It means bringing out junk insurance that doesn't have good benefits. It means bringing back all the discriminatory practices that existed before the ACA, like lifetime or annual limits or rescissions. You know, before the Affordable Care Act, you could actually buy a policy and the insurance company could come in and rescind the policy because they were spending too much money on your insurance policy. We worked very hard with the ACA to get rid of all these discriminatory practices. They would come back again if this lawsuit succeeds. I don't think there should be any mistake. This lawsuit brought by a group of Republican attorney generals is nothing more than a continuation of Republican efforts to sabotage the health care of millions of Americans. Having failed to repeal the law through the legislative process, Republicans are attempting to invalidate the law through the federal courts. And they have, at least for now, succeeded at the district court level. Last month, Judge Reed O'Connor of the Northern District of Texas declared the entire ACA was invalid. His decision would eliminate the law's protections for pre-existing conditions, as well as entirely unrelated provisions, such as the Medicaid expansion and the closing of the Medicare prescription drug donut hole. This decision has been roundly criticized by legal scholars. Conservative scholars like Jonathan Adler joined with other scholars in writing that the decision was a mockery of the rule of law and basic principles of democracy. Judge Connor's decision is an exercise in raw judicial power. It's not the job of the federal judges to strike down entire statutes without considering what Congress intended. I yield back.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm always delighted when my friends on the other side believe in judicial restraint. So it's nice to see we have some new converts in that. I just make my basic point again, Madam Speaker. We're here for no particular reason debating something that we did last week, giving that power to the Speaker. I didn't agree with that vote. We had an opportunity last week, actually, to take up a Republican measure that would have legislatively guaranteed protections for pre-existing. The majority chose not to do that. So I'm just forced back on the conclusion that this is much more about political theater than it is about genuine substance. I will say, though, in disagreeing with my good friend from New Jersey, I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be able to be an expert judge of the legal merits. But I do think I would not so blithely dismiss 20 state attorney generals and a court that ruled in their favor. It tells me that there are significant legal issues here, and that those legal issues are going to be litigated in due course. What mystifies me is why we need to be involved in it, since there's high-powered law protection states with different points of view that are in this right now. So again, I see no particular reason to do this, although with all due respect, my friends have already given the Speaker the power to do it, so I don't know why we need to do it a second time. But again, I'm here to represent my colleagues on my side of the aisle, and we'll continue to do that. With that, Madam Speaker, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, I rise today to support this resolution to intervene against the egregious Texas versus United States lawsuit that seeks to end the Affordable Care Act, or, as I like to call it, the Civil Rights Act of the 21st century. In a few days, we're going to be celebrating the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who once said, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health care is the most shocking and inhumane." Since the ACA was enacted, significant progress has been made to lessen the inequality in our healthcare delivery system. To dismantle those life-saving protections now is unfounded and unjust. It is unjust to deny those with pre-existing conditions access to health care. It is unjust to cut off insurance coverage to a child with cancer because she has reached her maximum lifetime benefits. It is unjust to charge women more than we charge men for health care simply because of their gender. It is unjust to increase the cost of seniors' medications by reopening the gap known as the donut hole in their Medicare prescription drug coverage. It is unjust to tell young people just starting out in life that they can no longer remain on their parents' insurance policies. It is unjust to reinstitute charges for preventative health care, costing more money in the long run when illnesses go undetected for too long. It is unjust to ask the working poor, not eligible for Medicaid, to purchase private insurance at the market rate when they are struggling to feed their families and keep a roof over their heads. Access to quality health care ought not only be for those who can afford it, it ought to be for those who need it. It is unfortunate for us to deny health care to people just because they were born unhealthy. A vote against this resolution is a vote against providing the basic human right to fair and equitable access to quality, affordable health care for all Americans. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me advise my friend I'm prepared to close. I see she has additional speakers, so for the moment I'll simply reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore.
The gentlewoman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you so much, gentlelady from Florida, and thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, sort of being last in this debate gives you an opportunity to hear all of the arguments. And so the question has been asked, why should we allow Speaker Pelosi to intervene? Well, she authored the bill. We need her to defend this bill, and we believe that she has standing. Another question that was raised was about an initiative that was offered last week, and that this is just a theater here today. Well, I was here the 60 plus times that we tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That is the true theater. And let me tell you something, Madam Speaker. Why do we think that there was such a strident effort to destroy the Affordable Care Act because our colleagues have told us it costs a lot of money. And we have tried to prevent insurers from maximizing their profits. And how do they maximize their profits? By denying the sickest people with pre-existing conditions, like the people I met today, the kids with neurofibromatosis, a serious illness that causes tumors all through your body. It causes you to wake up in pain every single day. If you can get rid of them, then you won't have to pay much money. To impose lifetime limits on coverage, not just for people under the ACA, but for everybody, including those folks who get employer-based insurance. Why have they tried to deny health coverage to consumers to provide essential health benefits? Because they want to provide these skeletal benefits, this fig leaf of provisions for folks. And so I think that we need someone like Speaker Pelosi to intervene, and I think that she should have standing, and this body ought to authorize it. I yield back.
The gentlelady reserves. Does the gentleman continue to reserve?
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Madam Secretary. Madam Speaker, last month, a judge delivered a ruling to gut the Affordable Care Act. A warning shot that was fired at millions of Americans of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs. The decision changed little immediately, but that didn't matter. Patients, again, panicked, because yes, they have been here before. The family with a young child who spend their entire life battling diabetes. The father in remission. The young woman facing addiction, desperately seeking treatment. Over the past 2 years, they have watched their government, led by a Republican Congress and a reckless president, come after their health care coverage again and again and again. So families wake up wondering if this is the day. Is this the day where they succeed? The day the president finally wins? The day my coverage goes away? The day I have to face my loved ones, my kids, my ailing parents, and tell them that we can't afford the care to make their suffering go away? They deserve better. And that's why I ask everyone to support this rules package. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I'd inquire whether the gentleman from Oklahoma is prepared to close. I'm prepared to close on our side.
Actually, and I know I informed you different, but my good friend Mr. Burgess got so excited by the debate, he came back and asked for an additional minute. So if I may, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield a minute to my friend. After that, I'm prepared to close.
First, the chair would like to remind all members to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. The gentlelady reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady for the recognition. Thank the speaker for the recognition. I would just ask a simple question. What has happened to your insurance premiums since the passage of the Affordable Care Act? They've gone up. They've gone up a lot. What has happened to the cost of prescription drugs since the passage of the Affordable Care Act? They've gone up. They've gone up a lot. All I would suggest is there was a better way to go about this. Republicans have offered ideas. It really, really would behoove us to work on behalf of the American people to solve these problems rather than continue to push this bill that has been so unfavorable in the eyes of so many Americans. And I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for yielding, and I'll yield back.
Is the gentleman prepared to close?
Madam Speaker, I am, if my friend is prepared to close.
Yes, I am.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield myself the balance of our time. Madam Speaker, in closing, I urge opposition to this measure. The majority is asking the House of Representatives to authorize the Speaker to intervene in a lawsuit over the legality of the Affordable Care Act. Such an act is unnecessary and wasteful. It should have been obvious to the majority that the Affordable Care Act was and is poorly written and precariously unbalanced. As Republicans warned them at the time it was passed, and the intervening years have brought those protections to come about. Premiums have skyrocketed. Insuranceers have fled the market. The American consumers have suffered as a result. The appropriate solution is not to intervene in a lawsuit, but instead to spend time working with Republicans to craft a replacement fix to this broken system. And moreover, it's certainly not to do today in a rule what we've already done in the same rule last week. So with that, Madam Speaker, I've enjoyed the debate, but I'm not exactly sure why we had it. But again, it's always worthwhile to spend time on the floor with my friends. So, Madam Speaker, I urge no on the previous question, no on the underlying measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself the remainder of my time and thank my distinguished colleague. It has been more than 9 years since Congress passed the Affordable Care Act. It has withstood dozens of repeal attempts, and the Supreme Court already has held it constitutional. Now a district court in Texas has determined that the whole law should be null and void. But the ACA is now so enmeshed in our society that we sometimes forget the numerous benefits that are now threatened by this case. It is not simply protections for pre-existing conditions. It is subsidies to help the middle class families and small businesses to buy health insurance. It's caps on out-of-pocket health insurance costs. It's an end to annual and lifetime limits. No matter where someone gets their health care, they have something to lose if this case is upheld. Madam Speaker, that is why the House of Representatives must intervene in this case. We need to stand with the American people, the overwhelming majority of whom support the crucial benefits of the Affordable Care Act. The administration is unwilling to intervene in this case and protect the rights of Americans. Thus, it is up to Congress to defend and uphold this law and all of the crucial protections it provides for our citizens. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. Pursuant to House Resolution 5, the previous question is ordered on the portion of the divided question comprising Title III. The question is on that portion of the divided question. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Speaker?
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
On that, I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this is a 15-minute vote on the portion of the divided question comprising Title III. Will be followed by 5-minute votes on the motion to recommit on H.R. 264 and passage of H.R. 264. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 235, the nays are 192. The portion of the divided question comprising Title III is agreed to, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the motion to recommit on H.R. 264, offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Graves, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will redesignate the motion.
Motion to recommit on H.R. 264, offered by Mr. Graves of Georgia.
The question is on agreeing to the motion to recommit. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. The yeas are 200 and the nays are 227. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill. Under Clause 10 of Rule 20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 240 and the nays are 188, with no one voting present. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members are advised to take their conversations to the cloakroom. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members are advised to take their conversations outside. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. The House will be in order. Members take their conversations off the floor. And members, please clear the well. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, 19 days into the Trump shutdown, there's no end in sight. Real Americans are taking his blows. Take Miss J's story. She's a constituent of mine who is a contractor for NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. With the Trump shutdown now into the 3rd week, she faces unnecessary anxiety and uncertainty on whether she will be paid. Yes, President Trump is making America's workers bear the brunt of his shutdown. Miss J must weigh what bills to pay if her paycheck doesn't come. As a mother of 4, she fears the loss of health insurance coverage if she can't cover her monthly premium. She describes herself as lucky to be in a 2-income household with the education necessary to seek employment elsewhere if it comes to the worst. Others are not so fortunate. One of her colleagues is an 81-year-old custodial worker who has dedicated over 30 years doing the toilsome work required of her profession. Ms. J asks, who will look out for her? It is overtime to end the Trump shutdown, and the tax-paying public at large expects the government of the United States to do the work they pay for. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Address asked for 1 minute, revised to my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to highlight the distinguished career of J. Tib Shraney, who has served the community of Chandler, Arizona for nearly 30 years. He has just completed his 7th term as mayor after being elected as a judge of the Maricopa County Justice Court. the city of Chandler experienced tremendous growth under Mayor Tibshraeni's leadership. Mayor Tibshraeni has not only served in office for decades, he has faithfully served his community his entire life. Chandler would not be the same without his presence and his tireless efforts to leave his city better than when he found it. Madam Speaker, Chandler will miss his leadership. It was my honor and privilege to work with him for the benefit of our constituents. I wish him and his family the best in their next chapter of life. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, right now 12,643 Pennsylvanians are being denied a paycheck because of a partisan fight they have no control over. It's time to end this shutdown and restore our government's ability to protect our country and deliver vital services to our people. The longer this shutdown goes on, the worse the impact will be, not just on federal workers, but on the communities that depend on them. Unless we act, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, will be at risk. Over 94,000 families in my district depend on SNAP, and national data shows that over 40% of beneficiaries are children. I've heard from food banks in my community that they expect a 12-fold increase in people who need assistance if SNAP recipients don't receive their benefits. That is unacceptable. We must reaffirm our most fundamental duty to stand with and support our most vulnerable constituents. Let's act to protect people across this country from hunger and malnutrition by protecting SNAP and reopening the government. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise with a heavy heart to speak about my constituent, Pierce Corcoran. On December 29, 2018, Pierce was struck and killed by a vehicle operated by an undocumented immigrant in Knoxville. This is a personal matter for me, Madam Speaker, because I've been friends with Pierce's family for many years, and they remain in my prayers. Pierce was an incredible, hardworking, fine Christian young man and will be deeply missed. People want to come to our country for new opportunities and the pursuit of happiness, and this nation is full of incentives that attract not only our legal but also illegal immigrants. The most recent data shows that there are approximately 606,000 overstayed visa recipients and 10.7 million unauthorized immigrants. Removing incentives that encourage unlawful immigration and demagnetizing that attraction must be a priority for this Congress moving forward. With stronger laws and increased border security, tragedies like the one that occurred in my home district could and should be avoided, and families like Pierce's might be saved from such a heartbreaking situation. I yield back the balance of my time, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Hawaii seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, of which I'm a very proud co-sponsor. H.R. 1 is a critical step towards reversing the accelerating deterioration in our nation's most cherished democratic foundation, the consent of the governed, and taking back our government for all citizens. It would fight voter suppression, simplify voting, promote election security, curb special interest and dark money in politics, incentivize smaller, broader donations, and fortify ethics laws. I wish especially to recognize the contributions of Issue 1 and its Reformers Caucus. These over 200 now former members of Congress, cabinet members, and governors have dedicated themselves on a nonpartisan basis to, quote, fix democracy first, unquote. My own motivation to return to Congress arose from my membership in this caucus, and my pledge to my constituents in Hawaii and throughout the country was and is to fight to fully return our government to the governed again. H.R. 1 is first and foremost for the people, and I urge its prompt passage. Everything else depends on that. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize Dr. Cheryl Dozier, who will be retiring as president of Savannah State University on July 31st. Dr. Dozier served for 8 years as the 13th president at Savannah State College, a historically black university located in the 1st Congressional District of Georgia. Because of her work, the university has made a number of exceptional improvements in different areas. Dr. Dozier reactivated the honors program with more than 70 students participating. She established a College of Education, offering a Bachelor of Science in Education, created a scholarship to help students who needed emergency financial support in their last semester, and opened 2 new STEM buildings. Thank you, Dr. Dozier, for your work educating students in coastal Georgia. I wish Savannah State University the best of luck in finding their next president. Madam Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to put a human face on the detrimental impact this government shutdown has on real people, many who are our most vulnerable, especially our children who deserve for us to lead with compassion. Our families depend on the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Right now, Madam Speaker, landlords are being asked to spare families from eviction because HUD funding expired, and they are desperately trying to find reserve funds to help our residents. This is not right. In Wayne County, Michigan, there are low-income families, elderly and disabled residents, and over 450 housing units whose contracts have expired, with another 150 expiring this month. Make no question, they cannot fly to Mar-a-Lago to stay warm in the middle of winter. The shutdown has caused HUD to halt health and safety inspections, putting our most vulnerable citizens yet again in harm's way. These folks will suffer due to Trump's shutdown. Madam Speaker, the president gets to sleep soundly while he plays political and partisan games, and the lives of Americans are put in harm's way. I uplift my neighbors and ask that they know that people here do care about them. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I look unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my mark.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise in honor of Law Enforcement Appreciation Day to show my support and utmost respect for peace officers across the nation. Sadly, last year we lost over 100 law enforcement officers in the line of duty. Of that number, 3 came from my hometown. I'm reminded today of the continued sacrifice these officers make and the dangers they face day after day, night after night. It is important that we always show our appreciation for those who work tirelessly to keep us safe. A lesson can be learned from them on service. They serve people, communities, a nation, not political ideologies. This selfless service is both physically and mentally demanding on officers and their families. So today, we honor not only those who serve, but those who serve alongside them. Law enforcement officers deserve our utmost respect and recognition today and every day. Please join me in thanking these brave men and women for their sacrifices, service to our country and our communities, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Western High School football championship winning football coach Dan Davidson on being named Orange County's Football Coach of the Year. Coach Davidson led the Western High School Pioneers to the first ever CIF championship. Coach Davidson built a winning team of hardworking young men, inner city kids, average athletes, made them believe in themselves, hard work, and you know what? They won CIF this year in Orange County. I want to congratulate Coach Davidson because not only did he build a football team that are winners, but he also changed the names and the lives of many students in Central Orange County. Coach Davidson, congratulations. All of us in Orange County are proud of you. Keep up the good work. Madam Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to discuss the speech the President gave last night. I was disturbed to see that some people in dealing with the crisis including a leader on the other side of the aisle, said that some people felt that a wall would be immoral. There are people on late-night talk shows saying that we don't have a crisis here. I'm going to point out that 90% of the heroin that comes in this country, that kills over tens of thousands of people every year in this country, comes across the northern border. I don't see how anybody could be so insensitive as to say that's not a crisis and not something we have to deal with at this time. In the last 10 years in Texas alone, they've arrested over 2,900 people who they believe have committed homicide who have come across the border. How in the world is it not a crisis when 2,900 people, that's almost as many people died in the Twin Towers, are killed by people who are in this country illegally? And finally, it is completely undermining our immigration law as President Trump continues to allow 700,000 people. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise tonight in recognition of National Law Enforcement Day. Our officers that hit the streets on behalf of our safety, we need to show them appreciation, and I do. We need to also give them better tools and better laws that make their job easier, because it is indeed, at the end of the day, us that they're protecting. When we have things happen in California like we saw with the tragedy due to lack of control of our borders, of an officer, Singh, who unfortunately had to give his life unnecessarily, these tragedies need to end. But on this day, as we recognize them, the thin blue line between us as citizens and the harm that could be brought to us is greatly appreciated. So for those that are always out there every day, that get up, kiss their families goodbye, and hopefully return home at the end of that day safe, as they've kept us safe, we honor them. We ask for God's blessings for safety and to return home each day intact as they keep our communities intact. We need to do a better job of honoring them by giving them the tools, the laws, the secure borders that will help them accomplish that. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today for our veterans and government employees out of work due to the Trump shutdown. On day one, House Democrats took steps to restore certainty to people's lives by passing a complete funding package to reopen the government. Now we are preparing further action to reopen government so that we can meet the needs of the American people, protect our borders, and respect our workers. In fact, one of my constituents who works for the IRS and specializes in helping hurricane victims told me he and his wife, who is also a federal employee, both are affected by the shutdown, and they cannot pay this month's mortgage and the other bills. Madam Speaker, he worked 12 hours a day in the aftermath of Hurricane Michael. He was there for the people of Georgia. It's past time we reopen the government and be there for our federal workers. And with that, I'll yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2019, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there is a twofold goal being sought by many of us right now, and it's this: to keep the government fully open and to secure our border. No one wins in a government shutdown. No one wins if the border is not safe. We ought to be able to rise above the momentary difficulty, whether it's a negotiation between the Senate, the House, the President, the House, the President, the Senate, and get to those mutually compatible goals of fully funding an operational federal government, as well as ensuring that Americans are safe and that we have the right type of assistance to our border personnel, the right type of barriers, the right type of technology, the right type of preventative measures to protect us all and to create the conditions in which America can have a truly just and humanitarian response to those in need. That's what's at issue at this moment. With that said, Madam Speaker, though, I think it's important at the beginning of a new Congress, as we were all sworn in last week, as this chamber was filled with members' children and outside members' families coming from such extraordinarily diverse backgrounds. It was a celebratory atmosphere, and it always tends to be that way, and then we get into the hard work of governing. As President Kennedy once said, to govern is to choose, but to govern well is to choose wisely. And in a society divided by deep cultural and philosophical differences that actually manifest themselves here in the People's House, it is incumbent upon those of us who have been given this awesome responsibility to govern to undertake the awesome responsibility of deciding to govern well, to carry forth that spirit of the swearing-in day with our families here and that oath of office, where there is a common narrative around who we are as a people and where we should go as a nation, reaching back to our most honored in time traditions and projecting them forward so that America can have confidence that we've set up the guardrails for a successful culture, a successful economy, a successful society. That's our job. And it's going to take difficult moments of prudential wrestling. It's my hope it'll be done in a civil manner, that people will make their firm case based upon their principles and fight for those principles, but do so with an eye toward building consensus. We in Nebraska, I believe, invented the phrase, get her done. Just get her done. Fight for what you believe and seek that which is possible. They're not mutually incompatible goals. That's our responsibility as legislators for the good, the well-being of the entire American public. With that said, Madam Speaker, I'd like to do something a little bit unique. I'd actually like to look back for a moment at the year in review and some important things that were accomplished. We tend to be caught in what I call the tyranny of the urgent, where what it is right in front of us completely occupies us. And of course, we have a 24/7 911 media that heightens all of this intensity, and it is what it is. But the reality is we did some pretty good things last term, and I want to review a few of them. In December, the House and Senate passed a new farm bill with very strong bipartisan support. And for a lot of Americans, it's very easy to overlook this accomplishment. Our grocery bills are some of the lowest in the world. Our food is readily available, and our safety net for those who are vulnerable is well considered. And it comes down to this. It's the vastness of our land and the quality of our soil and the gritty ingenuity of our farmers and ranchers that lay the foundation for America's prosperity and its stability and our economic vitality. We tend to forget this because our food comes somewhat easy to us. The Farm Bill provides risk management tools to maximize this natural gift, allowing farmers and ranchers to provide food security for our country. Our nutrition programs, as well as food assistance to millions of others around the world, protect those who are in very vulnerable circumstances. This bill also fosters conservation practices that enhance the protection of our soil and our wildlife habitat. And I'm pleased by the increase in the number of acres in the Conservation Reserve Program. The Farm Bill ensures that America continues to lead the world in agricultural innovation, food safety, and renewable fuels. In Nebraska, agriculture is central to our well-being, our way of life, and our culture. Our land-grant universities help ensure that we maintain our tremendous productivity. Now, the Farm Bill is a once in every 5-year or so piece of legislation, and the birth of such legislation is neither smooth nor easy. But we got it done. It's a good lesson for what we are facing now with new challenges ahead of us. We got it done in a very strong bipartisan vote. For Nebraskans and for many people throughout rural America, the Farm Bill is not just another Washington accomplishment. Like the rhythms of planting and harvesting, it is an expected rite of legislative passage, essential to who we are as a people, as Americans, and our well-being. One of the things that I'm excited about, Madam Speaker, is that beginning farmers and local food producers are big winners in our Farm Bill. I'm very encouraged by the growing interest of young people in seeking agricultural opportunity. We are witnessing a food culture awakening with local chefs and farmers markets and a keen interest in eating local. The Farm Bill helps these next generation farmers and food entrepreneurs through new resources and training, such as the local agriculture market program called LAMP, which accelerates the farm-to-fork movement across America, connecting local farmers with both families, consumers, and restaurants. And this offers a big, big opportunity for us all. I'm also happy, Madam Speaker, that the Farm Bill includes my provisions to enhance the Farmer-to-Farmer program. For over 30 years, the Farmer-to-Farmer program has connected volunteer American farmers, agricultural extension experts, and others with deep knowledge of the ag industry with our farmers abroad, the world's farmers abroad. And from dairy production to seed selection to entomology, irrigation, crop yield determination and improvement, as well as farm credit, this sharing of America's agricultural expertise dramatically enhances the capacity of peoples elsewhere to grow their own food, contributing to worldwide food security, community well-being, and human flourishing. Food security is the key. This year, we also passed the Global Food Security Reauthorization Act. I'd worked on this important piece of legislation when it first passed. It amends the Global Food Security Act of 2016 to enable programs that support sustainable agriculture around the world, and it extends assistance for international disaster relief and rehabilitation, especially for emergency food programs. Now, switching topics a bit, Madam Speaker, the fundamental duty that we all have here is to keep America safe. This requires a modern and properly equipped military. In recent years, our force structure has significantly deteriorated. Planes could not fly in certain circumstances, and other equipment was not available. This past year in Congress, we passed the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act and the Defense Appropriations Bill. Again, most of the government is open and functioning. We're working toward the rest. And this helps rebuild our military after years of budget cuts. Our active duty, National Guard, and Reserve Force personnel receive a 2.6% pay raise, the largest in 9 years. We are going to purchase new aircraft and tanks and ships and other military hardware to replace and upgrade worn-out equipment. These bills also increase across-the-board funding for additional personnel, training, maintenance, and operations to ensure that our military is always ready to defend our nation. Now, Madam Speaker, while a strong military is vital, America's safety and prosperity also depend upon a skillful mix of diplomacy and development. Building authentic relationships around the world and attacking the root causes of structural poverty are equally important goals that need to work in tandem with a properly sized and prepared military. A race toward technological superiority through ever larger weapons systems will not unilaterally resolve our most difficult security challenges. The tech gap is closing, that we enjoy, the tech gap that we enjoy, is closing and will continue to close rapidly. Then we have to ask ourselves, then what? I often use the phrase foreign policy realism to guide how I believe the United States should engage in global affairs. It's this: strong defense, smart diplomacy, and sustainable development. These are the three pillars. And then thanks to the dedication and courage of our troops and our diplomats and the exhaustive work of many others who serve from their heart in faraway places, we have been, or we ought to be, very grateful that our country has been kept safe from attack. There is always a however. However, real risk remain. Northern Iraq and Syria are places where ISIS and other dark forces could regenerate. Iran meddles and frustrates peace throughout the region. The United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia is under severe scrutiny in light of our intelligence findings that implicated the Saudi crown prince in the murder of an American-based Saudi journalist. We also face risk from various actors gaining access to increasingly powerful, yet more nimble and mobile nuclear capabilities. Madam Speaker, I lead the Nuclear Security Working Group in Congress. We had a very important dialogue with the administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration as we closed out the last Congress to discuss our coordination of nuclear non-proliferation activities. There are two core elements in preventing attack. The first, of course, is deterrence, and the second is threat reduction. Again, the dual work of our military and other government efforts in nuclear threat reduction has been successful in preventing nuclear and radiological terrorism. The challenge is to constantly reassess the changing threat environment. A single failure can lead to catastrophic consequences, and these efforts must be matched with an equal effort to halt and reverse nuclear proliferation throughout the world. In a September conference, we gathered with national and nuclear security experts and former government officials across 4 administrations with a singular goal to improve U.S. government oversight and coordination of nuclear counter and non-proliferation efforts. And as a result, I am going to propose the creation of a Nuclear Non-Proliferation Council to enable a unified U.S. government strategy on nuclear non-proliferation. In the National Defense Authorization Act, which we passed, there's a section also that perhaps has been overlooked, but it's important. It will speed the elimination of cesium chloride that can be used to make dirty bombs. This policy change that we were pleased to work on reduces the risk of a catastrophic radiological attack inside our borders. In the face of expanding Russian and Chinese nuclear arsenals, our defense bill modernizes our nuclear deterrence capability, even as we hope to reestablish a more stable and peaceful world. Only through a combination of strength and an openness to dialogue can we avert a new nuclear arms race. Back in June, the first ever meeting between leaders of the United States and North Korea took place. President Trump met face-to-face with Kim Jong-un in a preliminary step toward reconciliation and denuclearization. The summit that was held in Singapore was a first step to shift an escalating trajectory of missile launches and hostile rhetoric, reducing anxiety for the region, America, and the world. And this summit took a new approach to a long standoff. For the first time, the U.S. president reached out directly to the North Korean leader. The meeting would not have happened, though, and this is very important, Madam Speaker, it would not have happened without a unified global community willing to support the preconditions needed to encourage Kim Jong-un to meet. As an initial gesture of goodwill, North Korea returned the remains of U.S. service personnel and destroyed at least one nuclear testing facility. Clearly, much more progress is needed, and a joint action plan will require North Korea to continue to earnestly engage in nonproliferation. I believe that congressional leadership should play a role here in policy developments that can help the administration reduce the nuclear threats on the Korean Peninsula. Now, Madam Speaker, where I live, Nebraska plays a critical role in keeping America safe. Offutt Air Force Base and Strategic Command are essential to America's security. And the steady work of guiding budgets and building the necessary coalitions here in Congress resulted in dramatic improvements to both Strategic Command as well as Offutt. The new U.S. STRATCOM headquarters building is nearing completion. This summer, it will be its increased capability beginning this summer will add to the combatant command's charge as one of the nation's most vital missions, and that is nuclear deterrence. And a major repair of Offutt Air Force Base runway will soon begin. Again, I'm very pleased working with the Nebraska delegation and our colleagues to continue to advance the completion of Strategic Command as well as the enhancement of Offutt Air Force Base. Offutt is home to the Air Force's 55th Wing. The wing conducts intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions. And this is very important, Madam Speaker, because again, it's something that is overlooked in our tense times. One of the 55th Wing's important aircraft is the OC-135B. It flies in support of the 34-member, international member, Open Skies Treaty, one of the last remaining functional arms control regimes that is operational between the United States and the Russian Federation. I'm pleased that working together, we were able to enhance funding for the OC-135B aircraft, again, vital to one of the last linkages of agreements with the Russians. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to another topic that really ought to be at the forefront of our discussions, but rarely is. If we're going to create a 21st century architecture for international stability, I believe it revolves around two words: human dignity. We traditionally think of diplomacy as between nation states. Increasingly, in our interconnected world, where people can reach to people in faraway places in an instant or by travel in a very short period of time, it's this deeper transcendent idea that is still operational in our culture. It underlies our founding here in America. It's in our earliest documents, it's alluded to. This idea of human dignity, this sacred space of personhood from which the free exercise of conscience and right reason and other rights that we tend to take for granted, such as religious freedom, flow. Human dignity, the two words that mark the 21st century architecture for how we ought to conduct international affairs, reaching toward authentic relationships and dialogue with people who we may have had tremendous misunderstandings with in the past, tremendous tensions, or even the grave consequences of war. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Madam Speaker, the tech gap is closing. We can beat anybody, anywhere. We can do that, and we'll continue to be able to do that. And again, the strong military is absolutely essential to keeping the peace and creating the conditions for stability internationally, which protects us here at home. But what happens when, again, the miniaturization of technology is such that any bad actor or any bad nation has ready access to it? We have to ask ourselves, and then what? It's this idea of being in authentic dialogue around this fundamental principle that's operative in the way in which we conduct our affairs: human dignity, mutual respect for that sacred space of the person and their perspectives and their ability to use reason to think for what is good for themselves, their family, and their country. Human dignity. This is manifesting itself very clearly in something that, again, is really overlooked in our dialogue because we're caught in the urgency of the moment. And let me point this out, Madam Speaker. It's about the country of Iraq. America has given so much. We've lost so much in Iraq that it's hard to understand why engagement is ongoing and necessary. The thought of it is exhausting to the American people. It's exhausting to our process. But I need to point this out. Much is at stake. Iraq once had a mosaic and an ancient tapestry of religious pluralism that existed there. Christians used to total 1.5 million. Now only a few 100,000 remain. The Yazidi community, another ancient faith tradition that lived in peace, in persecution, off and on, but in attempting to live out their faith tradition in northern Iraq. Right now, there are about 400,000 people from the Yazidi faith tradition trapped in refugee camps. They're internally displaced persons, living in tent structures, distant from their northern Iraq homes, and many are children. As of this past summer, we had a statistic, and it's hard to know where this is now, given the dynamics, but about 3,500 Yazidi women remained as slaves of ISIS. In fact, Madam Speaker, we're still working through the logistics, but I'm very proud that I reached out to Nadia Murad, who was the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who was captured by someone named Suleiman the Iraqi and held in slavery. She came to my office, and I asked her, I said, I'd like to hear the fullness of your story. But I recognize that's selfish on my part, and the horror and the pain and the tragedy are very real to you. So if you do not wish to say anything, I completely understand, but I would like to know more if you're willing. And she agreed. And she told us, moment by moment, about what happened to her family, about how she was captured, sold, and how she eventually escaped with the help of a Muslim family, by the way. I reached out to Nadia recently, and I invited her to the State of the Union, and she's going to come. We're working through it, and I'm hopeful that works out. But right now, she's scheduled to come. And I'm proud of that. Because it's not about me giving a speech here about human dignity. And I think Nadia would agree with me in me saying this. It's not even about the trauma that she went through and the need to heal. The reason that she's speaking so clearly and so courageously about the horror she went through in the midst of her great pain is this singular concept right here: human dignity. How can civilization survive if we do not somehow rally ourselves around this fundamental principle of respecting the sacred space of personhood, of allowing people the liberty to live in peace and exercise their tradition as they see fit, to do good things for their family, to carry forward the wisdom of their tradition and ages through their family life and the exercise of their faith? If we give up on that principle, where do we go? Well, we can fight it out. We might even be able to win. But the deeper answer lies in the message that Nadia and so many others are telling us, crying out for justice and humanitarian relief and begging for a new way to think, a new way to order ourselves. And because we have the philosophical foundation here in America, because we've been a just and generous society and we've welcomed people who have fled persecution, the world looks at us as this beautiful place of the residual of the protection of that fundamental value that I believe every heart longs for, to be respected, to be in community, to be loved. Now, here's what I think we ought to do. We have about 5,400 American troops in Iraq. And with the help of international partners, we've been training Iraqi national forces and nurturing their capacity to lead and finish the work of defeating the dark, twisted horror of ISIS. And the Iraqi forces that we have trained, and at the behest of the Vice President, I went there last summer, and the military told me directly, they have fought, and they have fought well. Again, the irony of the attack of ISIS and the genocide against Christians and Yazidis and other religious minorities, and the killing of so many innocent Muslim people has created a nationalism, if you will, among the Iraqi people, and they fought hard and fought well and taken many, many casualties. But here's the key. An additional security footprint is still required in the Nineveh Plain and Sinjar so that it is possible, these are the areas in northern Iraq proximate to Kurdistan, a new security settlement in that area would allow the return of Christians, and they allow the return of Yazidis to their traditional homes and begin to rebuild. Now, again, as I mentioned in July, at the request of the Vice President, I joined Administrator Mark Green of the United States Agency for International Development and Ambassador-at-Large Sam Brownback, or Ambassador for International Religious Freedom at Large, Sam Brownback, former governor of Kansas. We went to Iraq together. And we were responding to reports that our initial effort to help the religious minority communities were not having the intended effect. And when we stepped into the dusty alleyways and streets and villages and camps, we gained first-hand knowledge of the broken conditions there. Our trip included intense discussions with Iraqi religious leaders, international aid workers, displaced children, UN personnel, as well as our military leadership. Despite the situation's fragility, there is certain progress being made, including courageous acts of ecumenical alliance and revitalization, often with international non-governmental organizations and faith-based entities. My firsthand observation was this: the situation in Iraq can be summarized in 3 words: possibility, urgency, and security. Multiple levels of challenge remain. Security is weak, and the prospect of permanent refugee camps is real. If Iraq loses its minority communities, the hope for a healthy pluralism in the region will die, and a severe chain of events will occur. Iran will expand its presence, ISIS could regenerate, out-migration will ensue, and Iraq will forever lose this extraordinary ancient tapestry of multiple faith traditions that are so vital for human dignity, mutual respect, and peace. So, working with the administration, our government, we are expanding and accelerating our humanitarian support for those who suffered genocide, and this is all good. However, the financial assistance must be combined with a proper security settlement that ensures a just return for these beleaguered minorities to the Nineveh and Sinjar. So, Madam Speaker, this is what I've done. I'm recently getting ready to reintroduce a resolution in the House of Representatives to develop a multinational security mission to integrate local Christians, Yazidis, and other minorities into the security forces of the central government of Iraq. Getting this right means justice for the oppressed, stability for Iraq, and the preservation of the principles necessary for civilization itself. By doing so, we will correct a fragile security situation. The religious minorities will have special autonomy for protection of their own areas, but again, under central Iraqi authority, under the Iraqi flag. The mission will be international in character under the Iraqi flag. I know right now many other nations are very willing to join this effort to put down a new security footprint that would stabilize permanently that area and allow people to go home. Madam Speaker, there's another issue related critically to human dignity, And while it's not something that we often talk and think about, but we're starting to get our mind around how big tech is controlling our lives. We're starting to worry that the surveillance of our habits and our contacts by people who shouldn't be surveilling us, these big tech companies, are creating multiple levels of difficulty. And this growing problem here in America is affecting most vulnerable persons here, our children. The CEO, a few months ago, of Google came before Congress, and he did receive an earful. Big tech is controlling our lives. Big tech is concentrated and dominating. And big tech is going to necessarily come under increased policy scrutiny to ensure that individual privacy is protected and competition is not stifled. But one overlooked area of problem is protecting children online. Now, Google's YouTube is the most popular online platform for children on earth, and 8 out of 10 U.S. children from 6 to 12 use it daily. In April of this past year, 23 child and privacy advocacy groups filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission arguing that Google's YouTube online video and advertising network systematically collected data on the online habits of tens of millions of YouTube-watching children under the age of 13, and that data was sold to marketers. Now, in support of this advocacy, Congressman David Cicilline, who's from Rhode Island, who sits on the other side of the aisle from me, we asked Google for answers on its policy regarding protection of children online. The response was weak. So our goal is to continue to try to ensure that the Internet's extraordinarily beneficial technological advances square with the time-honored values essential to a humane, decent, and dignified world. We want Google to thoroughly answer our questions. We want Google to be true to its original motto, don't be evil. Now, Madam Speaker, let me turn to another topic and touch on it briefly to talk about what is germane in this moment, given the discussions of border security, but some of the things we actually worked on last year that weren't successful, but nonetheless may provide some answers for the current dilemma that we find ourselves in. America is, again, a kind and generous nation, and we've opened our arms to persons who seek refuge and want to rebuild their own lives and accept and embrace the deeper values of our country. However, charity cannot flow from chaos. No one is entitled to enter America illegally. Law and order create the conditions for justice and compassion. Law and order create the conditions necessary for charity, for justice, and compassion. Now, the dynamics around immigration are complex and multi-layered, but a Yale study came out last year that said the number of persons illegally in the United States could be as high as 30 million, but at least 40% of those have overstayed a visa. And over the past 30 years, and this is what we're wrestling with right now, over the past 30 years, incomplete border control, insufficient federal enforcement, and the cynical exploitation of the poor for economic gain here in America has created an attractiveness and led to a failing system. So in an attempt to meet multiple immigration challenges, to align the various perspectives that are here in Congress about a humane and compassionate response, about the need for additional necessary border resources, about the need to update our immigration laws. This year we voted on legislation that would stiffen internal enforcement, modernize our immigration laws, and significantly increase border resources. The House legislation moved more toward a merit-based immigration system, provided new funding for more humane shelters at the border, It accelerated the judicial review process, and it made accommodations for those to resolve those facing the anxious ambiguity who are called the Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals, or DACA kids. Children who are brought here through no fault of their own. I supported these initiatives, but unfortunately, they failed in our House. And moving forward, I think we need to keep certain other priorities at the forefront of the immigration debate, which is, of course, an increase in border security, robust internal enforcement, and this additional priority, which is now only coming to light. We have been doing this for a number of years. Of course, the policy needs to be revisited and evaluated in terms of success, but I do think it's an important one. Moving the immigration debate off the 1-yard line and working with creative and imaginative foreign policy engagement with the countries in the Northern Triangle of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. In that way, to help those countries build more just and humane systems, both economically and politically, to create the conditions for stability, decreases the intensity of need for outmigration for either economic purposes or fleeing criminal activity. Now, immigration can seem remote and abstract for many of us, but it is important to remember that it has a human face. And I'm very proud that we're doing two things at once here. We're, of course, debating the importance of immigration policy and potential changes, but also assisting many people who have gotten tangled in immigration difficulties back home. Madam Speaker, I think there are certain things in this House that transcend disagreement, and one of them is our veterans. Americans often sense what is right and good, and we instinctively recognize the nobility of self-sacrifice for another, for our country, and for our timeless ideals. And our veterans stand above the division and discord, beyond politics, to what is lasting and true. But beyond our applause and admiration, we are also duty-bound in this body to keep our promise to care for them. So, this past year, we did some important things. Back at home, we are in the process, after some long negotiations, of creating a new state-of-the-art VA facility in Lincoln on the historic Veterans Campus there. This is a victory. This is a significant victory for economic regeneration of a unique historic property, and it arrives on the heels of a very successful public-private partnership to expand and improve and innovate the Omaha VA Medical Center. I'm so proud that Nebraska continues to inspire the nation with creative partnerships to assist our veterans. Now, here in Congress, we passed the law called the VA Maintaining Systems and Strengthening Integrated Outside Networks. The acronym is the Mission Act. It was signed into law, and it brought the long-needed reforms in the last Congress to the VA system. It provides a replacement for the VA Choice Program and consolidates community care programs for veterans who live far from a VA center or experience long wait times for care. This is going to assist many of our veterans in rural communities and help them receive the quality of care that they deserve in a reasonable amount of time. This act also expanded the Veteran Caregiver Program, making more pre-9/11 veterans and their families eligible for assistance. Now, another bipartisan project that I hope we can pursue shortly, and we've been in dialogue in a bipartisan manner in this, is to work with the international community to create a historic center at the site of our D-Day battles in Normandy. A new institute that's being envisioned by some European colleagues could reestablish for the 21st century a renewed understanding of the pivotal battle that happened on D-Day, its consequences for the war, and the institutions that emerged afterward that have created the conditions for stability and prosperity, many of which are aging and need to be updated and challenged. The United States cannot pull the world's weight alone. We need to be in authentic partnership and authentic dialogue when we have differences, but in partnership with those who have been given the capacity by our sacrifice, both military and economically, to advance their own economies and build out just systems of governance. Again, the 21st century of architecture of international diplomacy is going to revolve around that central idea. Authentic partnerships based in the philosophical principle of human dignity that lead to burden sharing and vision sharing at the same time. Madam Speaker, I had an interesting thing happen this summer. I wasn't at home, and I regret that I wasn't there to receive him, but he stopped in my office. World War II veteran Sidney Walton stopped by, and he has a really fascinating story. See, he told my staff and some of the young people there, the interns, he said he has a deep regret that when he was young, he never really took the time to visit with the last few remaining Civil War veterans. So he's taken it upon himself. He's embarked on a national no regrets tour. And his goal is to visit all 50 states and give young Americans the chance to meet a World War II veteran. And again, his name is Sidney Walton. We were honored to have him in Nebraska. And he will finish his tour at the White House, as I understand it, this February on his 100th birthday. Thank you, Sidney. Great, great effort. Madam Speaker, let me also touch upon another area that's so essential to our well-being, our sense of being able to fulfill these deepest longings that we have, our healthy sense of ambition for ourselves and for our family. A lot of times around here we cite economic data, and have a bunch of charts that show statistics. We do a lot of that around here. It doesn't really convey, I think, the deeper dynamics of what is happening. But let me go into it just for a bit and talk about the positive outcomes that have occurred. This year we've seen more jobs, increased wages, reinvestment in equipment, plants, and research development. Our gross domestic product, one of the measures of the economy, is climbing, and median household income is rising. Unemployment is at a 50-year low, and many people who have been marginalized or on the sidelines, thankfully, have found access to meaningful work. And if we think about a holistic approach to helping our neighbor, work is dignity. When a person is able to use their gifts and talents, either their two hands or their intellect, to make things, they're not only providing for their own well-being, but they are in solidarity with the community. And this benefit of exchange goes beyond just material. It creates the value of relationships. That's the beauty and dignity of work. And when people are sidelined, when entire communities have been decimated through poor planning or poor policies, or become over-dependent upon one industry that decides it's going to pick up and leave, and we've seen that happen over and over in America, it's not fair to people. It's not fair to communities. But when we can see a return of entrepreneurial momentum, especially in small business, when again, people who have had real difficulty for whatever reason, finding access to meaningful work, restores the individual's vitality, of course helps them to help themselves, but creates solidarity in community. That's what, when we go into all these charts and graphs and economic figures, we really ought to be talking about what I just said. The dignity and beauty and meaning of work, the gift of work, the ability to create, the conditions necessary for societal flourishing. So, last year we passed an important, what's called Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we are seeing this enhanced economic growth and more take-home pay for families. In addition to those important benefits, there's another little-known provision in here that I want to touch on for a moment, and it's called Opportunity Zones. And it provides powerful tax incentives to encourage revitalization of some of the newest, most economically distressed areas of the country. This has been overlooked in terms of our understanding of the dynamics of that law. This investment opportunity will foster job regeneration and make better use of taxpayer dollars already spent. And it forges stronger communities. Madam Speaker, I used to be on our city council back home, and most of city council work is public works. And when you see an area that is no longer functioning well, it's not just a blight on the community. It's not just that buildings are run down. We already made an investment there. We already paid for streets. We already paid for street lights. We already paid for utilities. And they're being underutilized. That minimizes the return on an investment already made. We also have to provide police and fire protection for these areas. Again, those are real costs to the taxpayer. They're not on an accounting balance sheet, but they're real cost. It's called opportunity cost, an underutilized investment. It's already there. So this idea of regenerating places across America that have the infrastructure already, it creates the conditions in which we get a better return on the tax dollar for money already spent. We're not chewing up additional land and resources. We're recycling, regenerating, rethinking possibility in some of the hardest hit areas of our country. I'm excited. In my own congressional district, there are 14 of these opportunity zones that have been designated. Now, here's some hard realities, and I should point them out because they're real. Let's just be honest. Our deficit is high, and it's stubbornly high. And there are real disparities between those at the top and those who struggle to make a living. And while we here, policymakers, tend to take too much credit for economic booms and too little blame for the crashes, most analysts do conclude that the actions taken by Congress over the last year have improved our economic outlook. Again, a good accomplishment. Got the Farm Bill done. We got the right type of tax reform done. We strengthened our military. And we're looking forward to the debates around where we go as a nation now. Something that continues to be difficult for all of us, though, is the right type of health care reform. And I'm going to venture out here and say that I would assume that everybody in this body holds to these three same principles. I don't mean to speak for anyone else, but this is what I believe. I think we ought to be striving for three things in the right type of health care reform: lower cost, improved well-being, and the protection of vulnerable persons. So let's just start there. Let's don't create another proxy fight over the Affordable Care Act. Let's just start there. How do we get to lower cost, particularly for people in rural communities who are priced out of the individual market and have incomes that they don't get a subsidy? Some of the farmers in my community are paying as high as $40,000 for health care. You can't do it unless you're very wealthy. So what happens? A member of the family has to leave and go get a job in order to get the benefit. We don't even know how to calculate the economic loss potential of forcing somebody to go do a job they don't want to do simply to get health insurance. We don't even know how to calculate that. So I proposed something in the Farm Bill. Unfortunately, the Senate didn't take it up, but it's the Rural Health Insurance Act that would have subsidized the startup of new risk pools to provide for better health insurance options in areas of rural communities primarily where this market has been decimated, where people have had to change the way they reorder their economic lives in order to have some access to health insurance. I thought it was a good idea. The startup costs for risk pool sharing of the sharing burden that's necessary to create an insurance product for smaller businesses they're high. So I wanted to provide, just like we do in markets that don't function efficiently, like crop insurance, a subsidy that would help the startup of these new risk pools in order to give more competition in the health insurance market in rural communities. It's one idea I had. We didn't get it all the way through, but I'm glad it passed the House. I look forward to working with colleagues on the other side of the aisle, again, who are looking toward those three goals. How do we think creatively and imaginatively about reducing cost, improving well-being? We are right around the corner from amazing breakthroughs through innovation and technology in both managing and preventing and curing disease. And we have significantly increased our funding on a bipartisan basis for the National Institute of Health for disease research, significantly. So we've done a number of things that are important for the American people. And of course, it tends to get overshadowed by some of the more philosophical fights that have occurred. But I'd ask my colleagues, let's embrace the concept that we might be able to find some policies that everybody could potentially agree on around three goals: reducing cost, improving well-being, and protecting vulnerable persons. I think that's pretty reasonable. There's another idea out there that I will be introducing this year. I already have a co-sponsor from the other side of the aisle. And here's the problem. For 3 years in a row now, America's life expectancy has declined. We are consuming more health care and dying younger. And rates of asthma and diabetes have skyrocketed in some populations. And it's really hard to see whether or not we're making progress on certain preventable illnesses. We can do better than that. That's not a necessary condition that we have to settle on. So to start an effective new conversation, I am introducing the Community Health Improvement Leadership and Development Act. It's called the Child Act. And my co-sponsor is from a large urban area. And this allows communities across America to fully participate in improving their own health. How does it work? When community members find an innovative way to improve health and save money in their state Medicaid program, the legislation allows the verified savings to be shared back to that very community and state. It's a virtuous cycle of assuring access to care and more creative prevention. I like it. It's a win-win for taxpayers and people in communities and towns across Nebraska and America. As we go on, I hope this is one of those ideas that fits into the three sets of principles as to how we're going to reduce cost, improve outcomes, and protect vulnerable persons. Madam Speaker, I know our time is getting ready to run short, and can you give me an idea of how much time is left?
The gentleman has 7 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to introduce a new topic in the time that we have remaining. And again, speaking to that which might be able to unite us in a very divided time, that which is a fundamental principle that's operative in most of our hearts, that which again transcends these temporary and urgent moments of policy division. It's what I call natural security. We talked about national security, we talked about economic security, we talked about human dignity, family security. Now I want to talk about natural security. Now here's an example. Now, Nebraska is one of the only states where you can find 3 distinct subspecies of the turkey. Madam Speaker, are you with me on this? It's really very fascinating. In the southeast corner of Nebraska, you can find the eastern turkey. In the southwest corner, you could see a Rio. And out west, you could find a Miriam. This unique trifecta exists right there in my home. Now, why am I raising this? Why would I be raising this? Of course, I find it interesting, and I hope you do as well, Madam Speaker. This newfound abundance of turkeys is an amazing story because due to urban pressures and habitat loss and improperly regulated hunting, not too long ago, wild turkeys were in decline across the nation, but they've since rebounded through basic conservation efforts. And with innovative thinking and proactive policy, we can conserve and restore other wildlife and natural habitats while bringing both social, cultural, and economic multipliers to our rural communities. And Nebraska has been at the forefront of such conservation efforts, and we'll continue to lead this charge at home as well as here. So I've introduced the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. Now, Madam Speaker, we weren't able to get it through Congress last year, but I think by the end of the session we had 120, it was probably a little bit higher, bipartisan co-sponsors So what does it do? It takes an upstream approach to habitat protection through robust funding of state wildlife action plans so that we don't have the downstream effect of habitat loss. In Nebraska, we do this through means of voluntary landowner agreements. And this is why this is important, as we approach the renewal of the Endangered Species Act, RAWA, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, actually gets in front of the problem by preventing wildlife from becoming endangered in the first place, and it moves us from costly regulation and litigation to collaboration. I'm very excited about this because I think it's another way in which we can use monies from lands in federal trust and plow back into another form of trust that creates a widespread benefit for those interested in environmental policy, those interested in conservation policy, and those interested in enhanced recreational sporting and hunting opportunity. That's why so many people have gotten on this bill. It transcends our divide. It's a creative mechanism by which we use certain monies that are already being gathered into the Treasury and apply them in innovative and creative ways. Now, Madam Speaker, with that, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have had time to present to this body an overview of last year's work. It's important because ultimately, it's not just about policy, it's about persons. A woman named Mary came into my office this past year, and she was with two men who had made their living as truckers. Their pensions were in danger. Mary just began to tear up as she explained the dire circumstances in which they found themselves because multi-employer pension plans, this is a little bit in the weeds, but multi-employer pension plans, some are in dire condition. So what does that mean? Somebody that said, I'm going to work for this set of benefits, and in turn, I'm going to be guaranteed an income of this level in my older years. All of that promise, all that work, and those promises are now under real threat. So again, working in a bipartisan fashion, that is an area in which is in severe need that we worked to try to fix last year, and we'll do so again, working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Madam Speaker, my intention tonight was to give an overview of the last year, because so often, again, in the dynamics of the moment, we lose sight of the good things that were accomplished for our economic security, for our national security, for family security, for the well-being of our land and water. And by taking a little bit of a look back, maybe this gives us some prospect for unity, consensus, while fighting on principle, but unity and consensus for good. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.